As you go about the business of everyday life, how often do you stop and question how and why you do things? Lent is a season of disruption. We're encouraged to slow down, consider why we do what we do. This week we reflect in John's account of Jesus cleansing the temple. Spend some time reflectively, prayerfully reading this passage. For the past 1500 years, Jewish people had celebrated Passover each year. Together they remembered how God delivered them from slavery in Egypt. Passover was one of 3 annual feasts which required pilgrimage. All men who were able were required to travel to the temple at Jerusalem to make sacrifices. Imagine just how busy it was as people from across the regions were travelling to the capital. Depending on their means, each man was required to offer an animal sacrifice, a cow, a sheep, or a couple of doves maybe. Rather than bring an animal with them, they could plan to purchase one on arrival in Jerusalem. Those responsible for the temple saw a business opportunity. Markets were set up within the outer courts. But in order to purchase animals, people coming from different regions needed to convert their cash into local currency. So another opportunity arose, running a local currency exchange. I know that in other accounts Jesus questions the integrity of their business practice. But in John's Gospel, the focus isn't so much on the selling as it seems to be on the place they set up their stalls. This is the temple. This is the place where God dwells. It's meant to be a house of prayer, not a marketplace. Jesus looks around and sees what's happening. How does he respond? If we're not careful with this narrative, we can picture Jesus acting impulsively, losing his cool in response to what he sees. But that's not the picture John paints. Jesus is in no hurry. He has time to sit down and be creative. He makes a whip. Then, whip in hand, Jesus drives out the sheep and the cows and releases the doves and turns over the money tables. How dare you turn my Father's house into a marketplace? Watching on, the disciples remembered words from a psalm they'd learnt as children. Zeal for your house will consume me. Now, if you're one of the people responsible for proper conduct within the temple, how are you going to respond right now? They demand that Jesus tells them by what authority, what miracles he might do to prove he has the right to do this. Jesus responds, destroy this temple and I'll rebuild it in 3 days. At this stage, they'd spent 46 years building the temple. It still wasn't finished. What are you saying, Jesus? We're not exactly sure what happens next. We're not told. John's telling of the Jesus story just moves on. But John puts in an editorial note, like it's in brackets for the reader. He wants us to know that when Jesus talked about destroying the temple, he wasn't talking about the physical temple, he was talking about his own body. After the Easter events, the disciples remembered Jesus' words and it all made sense. Things don't always make sense at the time. How might this passage be speaking to us as we journey through Lent, as we prepare our hearts for Easter? If Jesus were to visit us today, if he wanted to check out our temple, where would he go? Writing to the early church, the Apostle Paul said, "Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple, and that God's Spirit lives in you?" I find the idea that I'm the temple of God, that place where God dwells, I find that really challenging. But it doesn't stop there. Paul unpacks it further. Later on he says, speaking to the whole church, he says, you, the church, you're the body of Christ. Each one of you is a part of it. Those of us who make up the church, we're God's body here on earth. Here are some questions to ponder. Sit with them, prayerfully reflect. Talk about them amongst yourselves, discuss them in your small groups. What does your day-to-day business, your business as usual, look like? Together, as his body, the church, how well do we reflect God's purposes? How might God be wanting to disrupt us? Are there changes God might be calling you to make? What do you need to do? Who do you need to tell?